Peace, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of BABTalks. This is episode 7. Here with my brother Asafo, and we have two lovely guests. I will bring both of those guests on to allow them to introduce themselves. Miss Stephanie and Sara. You can go in whatever order you want. Then, as always, we will get started with back and forth questions from me and Asafo. So, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can definitely type your questions in. Towards the end, we'll have give you opportunity for you to engage with the two lovely speakers. So go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I'm Stephanie Southworth. I'm a senior lecturer of sociology at Coastal Carolina University.
And I'm Sara Brallier. I'm a professor of sociology at Coastal Carolina University.
So we're delighted to have both of you on. So today our topic of discussion will, the title of our episode is The American Dream, Bootstraps, and Public Policy. So we're going to be discussing a convergence of things. So both of you have done a lot of work with homeless populations, unhoused individuals. If you could explain to us, give us a little bit of a backstory about how you both got into this type of work.
Go ahead, Sara.
Well, just to be clear, Stephanie certainly is the leader in our research project. But one of the things we were interested in is understanding the unmet needs of individuals experiencing homelessness in our community. And it was Stephanie's great idea to, instead of going from a top-down approach, is to ask folks who are experiencing homelessness, what kinds of services are you using and what kinds of services do you need? And so that was where our research started. And to be honest, we initially thought that perhaps we could find problems that we could address, do a fundraiser, help them get access to items that they couldn't access. But instead, what we really found is that the majority of the problems that are faced by people experiencing homelessness in our community are structural. They are not going to be solved by a fundraiser. We are going to need things like transportation, affordable housing, well-paying jobs, access to medical care, access to mental health care, access to addiction services. And so it's been a really interesting and informative 5 years in which we've interviewed over 250 people experiencing homelessness in our community. Do you want to add anything, Stephanie?
No, that's what we've been doing. We were able to help with some of the problems with transportation by putting together bike share programs in the men's shelter here in Myrtle Beach. We help other organizations supply them with bikes to give to their residents. But this is just like a Band-Aid. It's not something that's going to help get anybody out of homelessness. It might help some people get and keep jobs, but it's not going to fix the problem that is a public policy problem and a structural problem.
So I want you to, each of you, if you have the opportunity to respond a little bit more to that. Backstage, we talked about financial literacy experts and gurus, because it's often stated that poverty is a result of individual characteristics, choices, mindsets, complacency, all these other things. And you even cover some of that in your research. But my question is, what do you hope this research that you have done, what do you hope it does to the people who are dealing with this, and how to address, confront, or even change American capitalism?
One of the real goals of our research is to highlight the fact that poverty is indeed absolutely not a result of individual choices. It is everyone we've talked to are experiencing structural barriers to, in our research, becoming housed. But when we're dealing with poverty, most of it is a direct result of structural inequalities, unequal access to, from the very beginning of one's life, adequate health care, education, and then that, will certainly accumulate into unequal access to higher education and jobs. And we see those disadvantages accumulate over the lifetime. There's a theory of accumulated disadvantages, and the idea is if you start with disadvantages, they tend to build on one another over the life course. And so, by the time people are adults or older adults, they've accumulated disadvantages. So we see people who start off having more challenges than people who are born into wealthy or affluent families.
And these people that we've talked to, some of them are some of the most hardworking people I've ever met. They've told us, I have a plate in my head and a broken leg and heart disease, diabetes, and I have to quit this interview. I have to go to work. And then they're working at a job for $8 an hour, and the county acknowledges you need $15 an hour to afford housing, even an efficiency apartment in this county. So with all these medical issues, they're getting up and going to work at a job that isn't enough to enable them to house themselves. It's impossible.
And Stephanie brings up a good point. I think one of the myths surrounding homelessness, you often hear people say, well, they want to be homeless. People are choosing. We didn't talk to anybody. Nobody said, well, this was my life choice. Instead, they all highlight those problems that I've talked about. I lost my job. I was incarcerated, and once I got out, I'm having trouble securing employment and housing. Someone in my family died. I got sick. One of my parents got sick. I got divorced. And so, we don't have adequate structures to deal with people. Lots of people are one paycheck away from homelessness, and something happens that they lose that paycheck, and then they fall into homelessness, and we don't have structures in place to stop that.
Right. I think it's always interesting the language that is created and accepted. Like when we talk about like capitalism, and Stephanie brought up a good point that the state recognize that the minimum wage should be around $15 an hour. And you're like, okay, what is the minimum I can pay these people so that I can maximize my profit? And we're like, okay with that. Like, it's not like we're not challenging that to say what's a livable wage or what's a maximum wage or some other languages. So I think that's an interesting thing.
We need to challenge that.
Yeah.
And another thing, in the 1970s, homelessness was almost gone. I mean, we have history that shows that homelessness is not inevitable in a capitalist nation. Even it's not inevitable. You don't have to go all the way to socialism to reduce or eliminate homelessness. When Ronald Reagan was elected, he started cut welfare, cut funding to schools, cut just about every social program we have out there, including environment, things that keep people safe. And when he did that, within 2 years, homelessness had increased to 500,000 people. And it's never shrunk below that since 1980, because the federal government, whether it be Republicans or Democrats, have continued these cuts. It's never, our social safety nets have never been back to where they were in the 1970s. So, when scholars were looking around and seeing, if homelessness was a problem, they're saying, no, I think we're doing pretty good. This isn't something we need to worry about. And within 2 years, it was back to being a social problem. And that really does show how public policy can impact the way people live. Because you can be poor and never become homeless. This is almost two different conversations. Just because homelessness had almost been eradicated didn't mean that poverty had. But you know, having a roof over your head is pretty important, whether you're poor or wealthy.
So let's dig a little bit into the research that you both published in Sociological Imagination, and the title we have here on the screen: "The American Dream: Using Robert Merton's Strain Theory to Understand the Beliefs and Coping Responses of Homeless Individuals." So, tell us a little bit about what the American Dream ideal is, and what Robert Merton's strain theory is. And also, in addition to that, tell us a little bit about what you did for this research.
So Robert Merton developed a theory, and it was actually a theory of deviance. He wanted to see what people's responses were when they were confronted with not being able to meet their goals. And he outlined several things, including they can, innovate, become drug dealers and learn how to make money illegally, or they can, just conform and do what they're supposed to do, even though they know that they probably won't succeed, or they can, all these different coping mechanisms. And one of the things that we were kind of surprised is when we looked at all of our interviews, we realized that rather than becoming drug dealers or just dropping out of society or, trying to run away or rejecting this idea of the American dream, that the idea that people, if you work hard, you'll succeed. The 250 people we interviewed, almost all of them believed that as long as they just kept working, doing the right thing, following the rules, getting a job, blah, 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 that they would end up being successful. And we asked people, where do you think you'll be in 5 years? And over 80% said, well, I'm going to live in a house, and I'm going to have a kid and a dog and a picket fence, and, variations of that theme. Like, here they were, with physical disabilities, with mental handicaps, with, working $8 an hour jobs. And still in 5 years, they were somehow going to pull themselves up by those bootstraps, even though many of them didn't have straps to begin with.
Or boots.
Or boots. They believed very strongly. And we didn't tell them that this was, because it wasn't initially a study about the American dream. This theme just popped up, and we heard this over and over and over again, that they believed very strongly that everything was going to be fine as long as they just followed the rules. Did you have anything to add, Sarah?
No, I think you summarized it perfectly. And one of the things that we really came away with is how problematic that buying into that can be, because it really places the responsibility on the individual. And we see that ideology coming from every level of folks that interacted with people experiencing homelessness, and, including the government, the local government, the social service workers, the idea that it is ultimately your responsibility to solve your homelessness when they're working $8 an hour jobs that will never result in enough money to afford housing. When they're fighting, as Stephanie outlined, serious mental and physical health issues. So instead of, and that was one of my big concerns, was that in all of the folks we interacted with, there was very little discussion of what should we be doing as a city, a state, a country to address these structural inequalities. It was all placing that responsibility back on the individual.
So
that was one of the. I'm sorry. That was one of the more interesting aspects of the paper that I read. It was the response or the attitude that many of the staff persons people who work within the city or the county that are responsible for helping unhoused populations, that the kind of attitude that they were taking toward the homeless, and many of them had embraced what is described as the toxic charity model. So, what is the toxic charity model? What is toxic charity, and what are some specific ways that people in the Horry County or Myrtle Beach, uh, I guess, bureaucracy, uh, exhibited that mindset, that attitude?
Sara, you want to take that?
That's yours, Stephanie.
Toxic charity is this man named Robert Lupton wrote a book called Toxic Charity, and in this book, it goes back to the old wayfarers' lodges of the 1800s, where people would end up at this place and say, "Well, I will dig ditches if you let me sleep in your barn or let me sleep in your lodge." And the theory is that you don't want to give anybody a handout, because if you do, then they won't learn to work and they won't learn to fend for themselves, that they'll become dependent on the charity of others. And this is very common. I hear this even in my classes. Students will say, and people in the public will say, "Well, I gave this guy $1 once and he didn't appreciate it," or "I gave this woman a glass of water and she didn't care for it." They're unappreciative. And if you make them work for this glass of water or this $1, that they'll learn to appreciate it more, theoretically, and then they'll be grateful and everybody will be better off. Robert Lupton was brought to Myrtle Beach by the city. Maybe it wasn't the city. It was some charity organizations along with the city. The city co-sponsored it, I think. And he talked to all these charity organizations and about his book and his theory. And they were like, "Oh, yeah, that's the way we need to go." Because all these people, and these people in quotes, they won't appreciate us or what we're giving them if they don't earn it. And so that's kind of the model under which a lot of these charity organizations are run, is, if you want something from us, then what are you going to do for us? And when somebody is on the last rung of the social ladder, that seems to me a little bit cruel, and it doesn't work. These people are not homeless because they're given too many handouts, and that's ludicrous. But that seems to be a very common model for a lot of the nonprofits around here. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
So it seems that this Robert guy wrote a follow-up book, Charity Detox, and I also, from what I read, he considers himself a Christian and a capitalist, right? And I know that especially our community has had rough times with both Christians and capitalists. Very explicitly, to help people recover from these books and people like that, could you go into how you believe poverty is created and then how it must be solved? I know you kind of mentioned it earlier, but tell us how you believe, or you learned that poverty is created, and again, what should or must be some solutions to, if not alleviate it, get rid of it?
Well, like I said before, you don't have to go all the way to socialism. And I say that because most people think if you're talking about public policy, trying to even the playing field, you're socialists or whatever. You don't have to go all the way there to make sure that people have their basic needs met. Like I said, Ronald Reagan, there was a period of about 10 years in which poverty wasn't eliminated, but homelessness was. And that was all because of public policy. And what you see today is the minimum wage has not increased. It's not enough for people to afford housing and food and transportation and all the other stuff they need to live. The pharmaceutical industry is so involved in politics that, healthcare has become almost impossible, even for middle-class people, to benefit from the system. Poverty and homelessness can be reduced dramatically with good public policy, with good social safety nets. And people are not going to sit at home and eat chocolate just because they have a social safety net that means that they can eat that week. They're not going to stop working because they're supported. Most of the welfare and other social programs are dependent on you showing that you're worthy and it doesn't make sense the way that the aid is given out and the way it is today. I mean, if you have a child and you don't have daycare for that child, how are you supposed to go to work? Or if going to work, you're spending all your money on daycare, it doesn't make sense even to work. So for a country that wants people to work so much, they sure don't provide a lot of incentives for working. I don't think I answered that question, but I had a bunch of stuff going through my head right then.
No, I think you got at the root of it. Is if we want to seriously address poverty, we need to have policy and structural changes. We need to pay people wages that they can afford housing, and we need to have an adequate supply of housing that's affordable. We need to give people access to basic health care, basic mental health care, treatment for addiction. The lack of all of those contribute to the inequality and the high rates of poverty.
I remember reading in the paper, one gentleman was asked something to the effect of, I don't recall the exact question, but what do you think could be done to help your situation and what have you, something to that effect. And I recall the answer was extremely interesting. He said that there should be a class where people are taught the secret. Yes, so there's where people are taught, about the book, The Secret. I'm not sure if our audience is familiar with the book, but I guess this kind of idea that focuses on the power of positive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it really goes to show the insidiousness of this kind of magical thinking when it comes to poverty and marginalization in general.
Absolutely, and it goes back to you are ultimately responsible for all of the outcomes in your life without looking at, it's really hard to think your way out of a criminal record or mental or physical health issues, your lack of education so that you can't get a higher paying job. Those are hard things to think your way out of, to positive, use positive imaging.
Another thing is, you just made me think of something, is that it's not just middle class and upper class people that are thinking this way about the poor. A lot of them, people that are poor, I shouldn't say them, people who are unhoused or homeless in this case, they feel the same way. This has been such a part of our culture and so ingrained in from the time we're born. We're told, work hard and you'll succeed, that they might make allowances for themselves. Like, well, I am in this shelter because I have these problems, but all these other people, they just don't want to work. So even within disadvantaged communities, they are still promoting this idea that if other people would just work harder, then they would be able to be okay. It's from the time we're born, everything around us gives us this message, and it's really hard for people not to believe that when that's all they know.
Tell me this. The concept meritocracy. Could you explain that and then tell us if you think it's a problem, is problematic or not?
So the idea of a meritocracy is that everyone's success is based on their own merit. So if you are successful, it is because, in fact, you deserve that success. You've worked hard and done all of the right things. So of course we think it's problematic. It always makes me think of the quote, he was born on third base, but thinks he hit a triple. The idea is lots of people have these advantages and they don't even recognize it. They think it's because of their own merit, but yet they really did start out way ahead. And so the idea, a meritocracy in and of itself is not problematic. The idea that we believe we're living in a meritocracy is problematic because we indeed are not. Your life chances are absolutely affected by the family you're born into and what kinds of resources they have access to.
When you said that, I'm reminded of I wasn't going to mention this. This wasn't one of the questions we had prepared, but I'm reminded of this book, Dream Hoarders by Richard Reeves.
Okay.
And he talks about this is a very good book, very important book, and I recommend it highly. And he talks about in this book this idea that I think we make a mistake when we just talk about the 1% versus the 99%. And I think we need to change that up, because it's not just the 1%, but he also argues that it's the top 20% that are also problematic, and push this idea of the meritocracy, and we are where we are because we worked hard and had the talent, and those people that are beneath us are where they are because they just didn't want to work hard enough. They didn't want to burn the midnight oil or go to the right school or join the right club in high school or whatever, or the resumes aren't good enough, or any number of things. And so it's not just the 1%, but the 20%. And on top of that, another interesting thing that he makes mention of in the book is that it's not just a conservative ideology. That there are many liberals, or self-proclaimed liberals, who have adopted this idea of meritocracy and bootstraps as well.
Right. That reminds me of this is actually going to preface for my next question. So there's a celebrity that I know that we have like these conversations. I don't know why I have the conversation with. Maybe it's weird to me, and I remember we was talking about like the Rihanna situation. Rihanna has access to this 1.4 billion, and then that guy who gave her access has 19 billion off of the deal, and they can make that much because 200 kids are mining blood mica, right? And they're like, well, she worked really hard, but she's being propped. So there's a quote in your report that says the mass media and the advertisement industry contribute to this ideology by portraying the success promised by the dream as a highly desirable and attainable lifestyle for all. My question is, what roles, if any, do celebrities play in this topic of homelessness, poverty, and this American dream? Do you see them playing any role in this overall thing, celebrities?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is we do love a story about a celebrity who started off in an impoverished background and made it big. And we hold that up, and that's great, but we hold that up as if that is achievable for everyone. When it's really very much the exception to the norm, right? Lots and lots of people work hard at their art, their sport, whatever, and are quite good, but yet don't, make it to the show. They don't become famous performers. They don't become professional athletes.
I keep waiting for a celebrity to say, well, yes, I was born in the trailer park, but because of this person I met and that person I met and all these supports I had around me, all these, people that helped me along the way, now I'm a millionaire or whatever. They don't say that. They even the ones that can see where they were born and how it affected all the people that are around them. They see that as an individual achievement and not a factor of luck. And a lot of it, so much of it has to do with luck. But when kids see that, they're like, I'm going to, be the next football player and make millions of dollars and be rich, or the actress or the singer, and don't see how many people had that same dream and did not win in the game of life.
So so one of our people in the comments raised a very interesting question. I'm going to post it here so we can take a look. All right, so, and this is a question I was going to raise as well, especially with Stephanie. If we don't have to go all the way to socialism, is it suggested here that capitalism is not the reason for homelessness? If capitalism profits from marginalization, from oppression of various forms, of if it's a zero-sum game, how is it feasible that it may be possible? I may agree with you, Stephanie, that it may be possible to eliminate homelessness under a capitalist regime, economic regime, but is it feasible with those at the top, the 1%, the 20%, the ruling class, the elite, whomever, benefiting from extracting as much money or resources, what have you, as they can, and keeping those at the bottom barely on the level of subsistence? Is it feasible that we could get rid of homelessness?
Well, the reason I said that, and I should have explained, I thought I explained why I said it, but the reason I said that is because the minute, with a lot of people, and it's probably not your audience, but the minute I say, housing is a human right and everybody, social safety nets, and I use those words, people say, oh, you're a socialist, that's bad. I love socialism. I would be happy to have a socialist economy, but it's shown, for those people that don't like that word or that philosophy of governance, we have shown in this country that in a capitalistic country, you do not have to have homelessness. It is not inevitable. And in fact, I think capitalism would be better off if everybody felt that homelessness was not something we wanted. We've had a capitalistic country for hundreds of years, and it's never been as unequal as far as wealth inequality as it is today. In the 1940s, I think, there was the top tax bracket included one person, and it was Rockefeller, and he was taxed 90% of everything he made over $1 million. And we've gone from there to this crazy level of inequality in less than a century. So I wouldn't mind going back to a much lower level of inequality, but homelessness is not inevitable, even if in a capitalistic economy. No, it's not. Right. In the same way that literacy is a common good, right? In a capitalistic economy, we want to promote literacy and people going to school. But in that same capitalistic economy, we have good schools and bad schools. That's not inevitable either in a capitalistic economy. It's what we value and what we decide to do with our resources. And if the people in the top 1, 20, 25, 50% want to hoard their resources, that's not beneficial to the common good. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, I mean, even on the school point that you raised, I think under the capitalist regime, we're seeing that the very institutions that propped up American capitalism are being cannibalized by that very system. So we talk about public schooling and what have you, and how it's essential to, the furtherance of the American dream and the ideals that are espoused under capitalism. Uh, there are billions of dollars that are, used to fund American public schooling, and the ruling class wants it. And they're going to strip schooling and strip funds any way that they can, even though that even this institution, even though this institution has propped up American capitalism, they want the short-term profit. So they're willing to destroy the institution for the short-term profit. And whatever, happens in the long run is what happens. They deal with it when it comes to that.
So I want to ask a question about, and I know the research was probably focused more on class as opposed to like racial analysis, but reading one of the stats, Black children born in low-income parents or with low-income parents have just about 2.5% chance of raising to the top fifth of the household income distribution as adults. White children born into those same families have 4 times more likely to reach the threshold. Have you noticed any things in terms of the study, like the direct relation between the American dream and Black families as opposed to other families? Is there anything that stood out in your research?
Well, most of the people we interviewed were white, because those were the people that were most common in Myrtle Beach in the shelter. But we know that people who are Black are at much higher risk of homelessness than people that are white. That's just not this population here in Myrtle Beach. But there's reasons for that, and there's reasons for the disparate wealth. Housing policy and redlining that was made illegal in 1970 is still having effects now, years later. Redlining, meaning that there were neighborhoods, if you lived in it, you couldn't get a loan to move out, and you couldn't get a loan to fix up your property in. That meant that middle class and lower class minorities who were living in these communities ended up going to underfunded schools, which means that they didn't go to as prestigious colleges. If they went to college, they were more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system because of the school to prison pipeline. All of these things have affected these wealth gaps today and have created a system where whites are much less likely overall to end up being homeless than minorities. And that's not an accident as far as public policy goes. That was done purposefully. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. And just to offer a bill onto that, the other stat that was in there, I think it was the 2017 Pew Research, when it was saying how white families were more likely than Black families. So it was from 41% white and 17% Black and 32% Hispanic to say that they've achieved the American dream. And then also you have a part about where they're saying that they are on their way to achieving it. And it's like they're lower, Black families on achieving it, so they say. And then in terms of that they will achieve it, like they actually have a higher percentage of saying, yeah, I know I would do it. And I was wondering, do you think there's any factors in those Black families being higher to believing that they're going to actually achieve it one day?
There have actually been studies done on this, why that keeps coming up. And if you haven't read Ain't No Making It, that's a very good book that kind of explains this by following 2 groups of students over time. What has been found is that even though Black families are less likely to say they have achieved it, they are more likely to think that they're on their way to achieving the American dream. And that's because they look back at where their parents and their grandparents were, which they see themselves relatively better off. And so a lot of times they think, well, my parents were worse off than I was, and their parents were worse off than I was. I'm not in the projects anymore. I now, I'm in this other part of town. My kids are going to better schools than I did. And that is pretty consistent over time. For the last 30 years, these studies have found that kind of over and over again. Whether it's real or not is a different story. But these people that are answering the surveys are not the same people, but different groups of people have been found to have that same experience or feel that same way.
Right. So
and that's just the explanation that has been given, that white families who are low income see themselves and their parents as kind of staying stagnant. Where Black families kind of look back generations and see progress.
So, I guess this is I'm randomly asking now an Asafo question, and the audience too, if you want to answer this, but does that now mean, or thinking about that study, there's a lot of Black families that I want my kids to have what I didn't have. Like, that's actually the goal. So, Asafo and the audience, do you feel like now it's partly our fault because we having the wrong goals, and we, is that a way to be like, oh well, we just shooting for the wrong target? And Asafo, you can answer.
I'll say that if I understand the question correctly, I think I don't think it's necessarily wanting more for our children than we had. I think it's fine. I think we look at when we say something like that, I think we look at it from an individualist perspective. I would say that I would want, we don't look at, we rarely, if ever, look at it from a societal perspective. We don't look at it from the standpoint of, okay, according to the Malcolm X grassroots movements report that came out years ago, a Black person is gunned down by a police officer or a vigilante or a self-appointed security officer, whoever, one every 28 hours. Okay. I don't want that to be the case when my son grows up. So I want to be able to have my son growing up in a system where that's not happening, whereas it's happening now. I want to do whatever I have to do to pass down a system or pass down, reality to my son where he's not, subjected to extrajudicial killings or extrajudicial, targeting from the police or whatever like that. I want to be able to, that's something I want to pass down to the next generation. Or I want to be able to say that we should, have our children living in a society whereas we had to deal with lead tainted water in Flint and these other places, we should have it where our children don't have to deal with that, where they have clean water, where they have access to affordable housing, or even housing as a human right, where they have access to, economic justice, food sovereignty, all these other things. I think when we talk about wanting more for our children than we had, during our time, we look at it from an individual perspective and not really look at it from a societal perspective.
I think you make a good point. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I can want my son to have a better life than I do, but I could also want all people of his generation to not face the same challenges. So I think you've made a very good point.
Go ahead, so
we got about 15 minutes. We're gonna wrap up soon, but I wanted to ask you, there was an interesting article in Liberation, the newspaper for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, where the homeless in Atlanta came together to form a union to demand from City Hall more, economic justice and housing rights and things like that. And it's a very interesting article that I would recommend, our audience take a look at. It's in the Liberation magazine. In fact, we'll, if I have the time, I'll post the link in the chat. But what are your thoughts on this idea of homeless populations forming unions and, you know, homeless groups organizing in this way and engaging in uh, direct action, uh, nonviolent civil disobedience, things like that, in order to have these policies that we discussed earlier implemented? Do you think that's feasible? Do you think it's possible that something like that could happen in Myrtle Beach even?
I think one of the challenges of that is that for folks experiencing homelessness, so much of their time is spent on just day-to-day survival, just making sure that, you know, they are getting adequate access to basic necessities, that it's really challenging for them to have the time and space and mental space to organize. But I want to back that up by saying one of the things I would love to see more locally and at all levels is to have their voice representative. I think that is incredibly powerful and more powerful than me coming in, even, you know, as a sociologist, as a college professor, and saying, well, this is what I found in my research. To hear it directly from the people experiencing homelessness is much more powerful. So I think that is great. I just think that it's a challenge beyond what people who are housed and have all their needs met would face in organizing any kind of social resistance.
And in Myrtle Beach, they have a committee set up to decide what to do about homelessness. They've been meeting for weeks. They held a public meeting last week, and their solution was to tell people to put out signs, spend money on signs, telling people not to feed the homeless. That's it. That was their solution. Don't give money to the homeless, give money to these other charities instead. After weeks and weeks of meeting, you know, if there's no political will to do anything, and homeless people who are homeless are struggling just to stay out of the rain or stay out of the heat, it's really difficult, I would think, for them to advocate for rights that the politicians don't think they should have.
You know, when I saw that article, I thought it was always interesting. One of the statements they said that homelessness is a violation of human rights, which I think everybody should agree to. But in our communities and probably in our circles, they consider Atlanta the Wakanda city, right? T.I. and Killer Mike was on TV talking about they Wakanda, and but at the same time, you know, Mayor Keisha, she has put together some solutions or some response to homelessness, and in my opinion, they're like piecemeal. They're full of shit. What would you say are some other BS ineffective solutions that maybe are put out there to address homelessness, and what the people should not accept, and just some things that you've seen or heard or feel that is just definitely a waste of time?
Well, one of the things that has emerged from our research that's problematic is the criminalization of homelessness. The, you know, arresting folks for being in public, for panhandling, it's simply not effective. And again, it's a violation of their human rights. You know, if you don't have any other place to be and you're sleeping in public, arresting a person for doing that seems to be unjust, in my opinion. So I would think that's one of my primary concerns about responses is the arresting folks, making it illegal to feed people. It's illegal to feed people in public in Myrtle Beach, and so that's problematic. Like, churches cannot come into a public space and offer food
or clothes or just about anything. We did a jacket distribution last year, and we had to sneak around make sure we weren't seen when we were giving out these jackets. And the people who were homeless that we spoke to said, oh, you don't want anybody to see you doing that because you can get arrested. And I'm like, I know, but you're cold, so here you go. Like, the stereotyping that goes on gets a little bit ridiculous. But also, busking, which in a lot of major cities is kind of a tourist attraction when people play their music or whatever, that's illegal. So when people want to do, entertain others as a way to make money, they're arrested for that too. So it's almost like, well, if I don't do anything, I can get arrested. If I do something, I can get arrested. And when I ask for help, all the shelters are full. So they're literally leaving people without a choice. And they're 99.9% of the time, they're not getting arrested because they want to sleep in a jail bed, which is another stereotype.
Wow. I think you just gave me some inspiration. If you can be arrested for panhandling, we should probably get a law to arrest people for selling financial literacy to poor people. So
absolutely,
y'all should sign my petition, and we're gonna make this happen.
That should be criminal. There's a whole market that takes advantage of the financial illiteracy of low income folks. I could go on and on, but you are absolutely right.
All right, so tell us as we're wrapping up, tell us a little bit more about the Rolling Forward project. I know.
I want to say one more thing about that financial literacy.
Yes, of course.
Some of the low-income people I know are better with their money than any wealthy person I've met. Like, to be able to stretch $10 to make food for your children for a week is very skillful. So just because you're poor does not mean that you're illiterate financially. Like, it does not mean you don't know what to do, how to deal with your money. You can't deal with money that you don't have. Sorry.
No, you're right.
Go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, part of what I was referring to is lots of times folks who have low incomes are just faced with such high interest rates on anything that they want to do that it really is criminal.
Yeah.
And then it begins a cycle where you just can't get out of it because you're paying such high interest. So it's not necessarily their lack of knowledge, it's their position. People are taking advantage of their position. Sorry, I'll stop.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Anything, and you learn rather quickly that anything can be said about poor people. You don't need any type of documentation. You don't need any type of research. You can make these just broad, absurd generalizations about millions of people, and people will accept it. People will agree with it, and it's shocking to me how willing we are to accept such absurdities. But yeah, go ahead.
Sociologists often think of that as othering. We often think of the poor as other. We love to have someone, they are not us, right? And we couldn't become that. So it's really easy to make assumptions about people who are the other. And so I think the poor are a big other in our country. Most people consider themselves to be middle class regardless of their income. And so when they talk about the poor, they are often thinking they're talking about the other. And as Stephanie talked about in our research, even among folks who are at the same place, living in a homeless shelter, they're going to other people who are in some way different from them. I'm here because of one bad experience, but those folks, they don't want to work. They X, Y, and Z. So I think that touches into, the idea that they are somehow different and inferior to the speaker.
We other each other.
We do.
Yes. So tell us more about the Rolling Forward project, what you do, and how can people want to support what they can do.
Sure. Well, we do a couple different things. We began as a bike share program in which we accepted donation of bikes from the community. Coastal Carolina donated a number of bikes, and we started that way. But we've also have at the Shepherd's Table, we have a giving wall in which we help folks get access to basic hygiene kits and other necessities that you don't often want to ask someone for. You don't want to ask someone for soap, for sanitary items. And so we have a wall hanging there in which we hang them, and people can go if they need something, they can take it off. And we'd like to expand that. We're going to be talking with some other groups about having walls at those places as well. And a big component of it too is that we try and do good research where we highlight the needs of people experiencing homelessness or food insecurity and try and bring that into the public like we are doing right now so that other people are talking about it and thinking about it.
Another thing is, very few organizations ask people, low-income people, unhoused people, food insecure people, what they need. I can't find a published study since 1999 where they've asked them what they need. And so what we are doing is unique in that we haven't stopped talking to people. We are continuing to ask different people about their needs and let them tell us what to do instead of being from the top down and having some organization say, well, this is what we have, take it or leave it. We're like, well, what do you need? And we'll see what we can do to get it. If enough people say they need toilet paper, we will get you some toilet paper or whatever, bikes. And actually the giving, we call them the giving walls. And these giving walls came from so many people saying, well, I just want deodorant and I don't want to have to ask somebody if they have deodorant or toilet paper or Kleenex or just things that most of us take for granted. We go to the store and get. If you're down to your last penny, you might have to do without. And so we have these walls where it's free. Nobody's going to ask them. They can take 6 bags if they want, and nobody's going to question what they are doing with those 6 bags. So that's our most recent initiative.
Awesome. So we have the link at the bottom of the screen there on Facebook. If there's if someone wanted to offer support, either financial support or make a donation, how would they be able to do so?
They can message us through the Rolling Forward page, and we'd be happy to chat with them about that. That's how we get most of our donations.
And if they follow the page, when we need something specific, we usually say, does anybody have any toothbrushes to donate? We need toothbrushes or whatever it is, bikes sometimes. So we're pretty receptive, or we answer pretty quick, our messages.
That's awesome. And, we're going to look at a couple of the comments here before we wrap up. But I'll just also say, and I think we're all in agreement here, and Stephanie, you made mention of this at the beginning of the interview. What we don't want is someone to come along or see this video or look at the the Facebook link and what have you and say, oh, these people already got it covered. So we don't we're good. We don't at the end of the day, the fight is for policy, and I think we're all in agreement with that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The fight is for broad, widespread economic justice that goes over and above what individual organizations or groups can do, and I think we need to make that clear. When we talk to people, and
I would love for a day when they don't need us.
Absolutely.
Right, absolutely. Right, so, Geechee, let's look at some of the comments here, or?
Yeah, while you're looking through the comments, I guess I asked a personal nerd question. So what are some books or literature or anything that either you are reading that you would share or advise people to check out?
That's all you, Steph. I'm reading murder mysteries.
The book Evicted by Matthew Desmond is a very, very good book on, it's an ethnography about people that are on the verge of getting evicted. They also, Matthew Desmond also looks at the perspective of the landlord, and it does a very good job of trying to present both sides. The landlord usually ends up not looking very good, but he tries really hard. And I can't think of the name of it, but Ain't No Making It is an excellent book. I can't think of the name of the author right now, but he followed two groups of boys, one Black and Hispanic and one white group, from the time they were in elementary school all the way till they were in their 40s, and looked at where they thought they would be when they grew up and how hard they worked towards that, and then shows how they ended up. And the minority kids were very had high aspirations, did good in school, all this other stuff, and the white kids kind of were drug addicts and stuff. They lived in the same neighborhood, and they ended up about in the same place. And so it kind of showed that aspirations sometimes don't matter if you don't have all these other social safety nets and such in place.
Awesome. Thank you.
So let's okay, Iris, as my Uncle Fred used to say, given a choice, who among us would choose to do bad? So that goes back to the I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, she makes an excellent point in that, lots of times people look at people who are successful and say they made good choices, but what you have to acknowledge is they had good choices. They had good choices to make. And so the folks we're talking about may not have had good choices. And I'll stop.
She also adds, we need a maximum wage if there's going to be a minimum wage. What do you all think about the case? There's a great book. I actually ordered, it's on the way to me now. The Case for a Maximum Wage, where I guess it talks about a cap that you put on like the CEOs and the wealthy, people who are in these corporations, kind of a cap on how much they can make in comparison with those who are on lower rungs. What do you think about that? Do you think that would be an effective public policy?
Yes.
Well, maybe they shouldn't be able to make over a certain percentage more than their lowest paid worker. And then maybe that would be the tide to lift all boats.
My favorite meme is, after $1 billion, you get a dog park named after you. And that's it.
Okay. So let's look here. Could this be the root of "we'll work for food" signs that we see at the roadside? I think she's referring to the Lupton Lupton book that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, people probably think that if they show that they're willing to work, that people will give them more, because that's what people have been told their whole lives. Like, well, get a job. So if they put the sign, "we'll work for food," maybe people will actually help us.
Yeah. To add to the other answer about the dog park and also meritocracy, I would like for somebody to show me that they did $1 billion worth of work one time. If they can show me that, then they can have that billion.
Right.
Let's see here. This message is embedded in fairy tales. I think Iris is referring to the Secret and the positive thinking. And there's the other book. What is it called? Was it Toxic Positivity, Stephanie?
Toxic Charity.
No.
Yeah, The Secret.
I know what you're talking about.
The one Barbara Ehrenreich.
Yeah, there's another one. There is a toxic positivity.
Well, right. Yeah, there is. I don't know the book, but that is a thing.
The book by Barbara Ehrenreich. I can't remember. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. Let's see what else. That goes along with Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. If these people come up in the conversation, dead the conversation immediately. Okay. So again, we're going back to this idea of, we're going to ignore all of the data, all of the research, all of the empirical evidence, all of the ethnographies, everything. Oh no, just get the secret. You'll be fine. You're not thinking positively enough. So I think that's it. So that's it for the comments. So with that said, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. Are there any final remarks that Sarah, you or Stephanie want to make as we close out?
I just wanted to thank you for inviting Stephanie and I to talk with you today. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Stephanie. I got one last question after you say what you're going to say.
Thank you.
Okay, so what can we expect from you both of you in the future as far as research or publications or anything like that?
Well, we're currently working really hard on a book that'll outline the findings from our research, and again, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things we really want to highlight is the need for a shift to look at homelessness through a structural lens, to really see the structural barriers that are in place and a call to action to try and address them in a meaningful way.
Once that book is published and available, of course, we'd love to have you both back on. You have an open invitation to Barter and Build Talk. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We want to thank our audience. We want to thank our audience and show our appreciation to our audience for sticking with us. Feel free to like, share, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us on Facebook at Barter and Build Think Tank. Become a member of our Barter and Build Think Tank study group. View the lectures and the panel discussions that we have on our channel. And we say peace. Thank you for listening. Peace, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.